Energy Media readers, we're going to have a conversation today with one of my favorite journalists, Shawn McCarthy, who just left the Globe and Mail not that long ago. And welcome to the interview, Shawn.
Thanks very much, Markham.
And we're going to talk today about a topic that bedevils journalists in the age of Trump. And that is, when do we call politicians and political parties liars? Because we saw the our American colleagues going through this during the 2015, 2016, and into 2017 with Trump. And we see where they've come down. Now we see CNN and other journalists regularly talking about the president being, lying and fibbing and stretching the truth and so on. But now it seems to have bled across the border, and here we are confronting it with some of the political parties, and we'll get into that. But now you have some other hats that you wear that are germane to this discussion. Why don't you talk about that for a bit?
The two things that I'm involved in where we have had this discussion. One is I teach a political journalism course at Carleton University in Ottawa, and that we're focused very much on the federal government, and how do you report when the information is wrong and demonstrably wrong is something that we've talked about. And the other area where I'm involved is I'm president of the Canadian Committee for World Press Freedom, which is a volunteer group that works on press freedom issues. And again, we have discussed and held panels on disinformation and the challenge that the media has in an age where there's so much disinformation and misinformation. And the difference is, in my view, disinformation can just be wrong. Misinformation is intentionally spread to confuse and to undermine credibility.
So can we say that there are, at least to start this discussion, there's disinformation, which is deliberate, and misinformation, which is a mistake. And political parties and politicians do make mistakes like the rest of us, and they're entitled to it. And but the disinformation these days, I should point out that, back when I started in this business 30 years ago, politicians made mistakes all the time, and sometimes they would correct them and sometimes they wouldn't.
And reporters once in a while.
Yeah. But then there's very clear ethical guidelines about how that should be handled, right?
Absolutely.
So you disclose it and you correct it in public and on the front page, whatever. So, but it seems to me that what is different is the amount of disinformation, the amount of what I just flat out call lying. And that seems to be overwhelming the amount of misinformation, which is still, seems to me to be a trivial amount. What's your take on the volume of disinformation that journalists are having to deal with from politicians and political parties these days?
Yeah, I think it has grown, and I think you're right to frame it as kind of the age of Trump, but I think it's true the world over. And in some ways it's ironic because it came back. It actually arose from a more left liberal philosophy about everything's relative, man. Going back to the old days, and so if everything's relative, it used to be the conservatives who insisted, and philosophically, that there is a truth that must be adhered to, but now it's everybody seems to have their own truth, or at least pretends to, and I actually hesitate to use the word lie because it implies, it doesn't imply, it means that you intentionally are using absolutely and demonstrably false information. And I think a lot of these, I think a lot of the disinformation is misleading. Is you can usually, if you call them on it, they will find some thread that would lead you to find to maybe not use the L word.
I think that's a very good point, and I wrote a column about this, and I think about it, I've probably written a couple, where I talk about the difficulty that journalists have and the struggles we go through to determine whether somebody is lying or is not lying. Because as you say, they make mistakes all the time, they get wrong information, or everybody spins, everybody has a worldview through which they process information. All of that is fair game, it is not lying. But I I have come to the conclusion that in my field, well, our field actually, you're an
Yes,
energy
yes,
journalist. In our field, very often we are dealing with objective facts. So when Jason Kenney or the Canadian Conservative Party says that Justin Trudeau and the federal government have caused the hundreds of thousands of jobs to be lost in the oil and gas sector, that is just flat out demonstrably wrong, in my opinion. The data does not support it. No credible economist has ever made that claim. And that is not spin, that is a lie. Now, that's my point of view. What's your take?
Well, I agree that I don't think that it's a clear fact. I suspect that if you called them on it, they would argue that the Liberal government killed the Northern Gateway pipeline, and if that pipeline had been built, we wouldn't have seen some of the deep discounts in the energy price, and therefore we leave it at their door. And that's what I mean by, it's kind of a three-step process of a decision that you make assumptions about the repercussions of a decision that then allow you to totally spin. And I agree with you. I don't think it's credible to say that the Liberals caused hundreds of thousands of jobs to be lost in the oil industry. But I know where they would go with that. I've heard it from them. So, that's, you then get into this sort of debate with them about truth and so on. One thing that one of the big made his name as calling Trump out, rather than using lie, he uses false claims. So Daniel Dale used to write for the Toronto Star, now at CNN, and he tracks false claims that Trump makes, and he does it virtually for every speech. So but he doesn't use the L word. He doesn't accuse him of lying.
Generally, when I use the term lying, I'm referring to so information that's been put out there. There's been plenty of correction on that particular point, and I'll give you an example. Jason Kenney and the United Conservative Party were claiming last year that the federal government could invoke the declaratory powers, and simply by declaring the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline project in the national interest, then that would make Premier John Horgan from BC, all of his objections and all of his opposition go away.
Right.
And that is, and then they even pointed to, you'll remember, Bill S-245 in the Senate that was supported or proposed by Senator David Black, and which was based on that very idea. And it's just demonstrably false. There is it can't be done. Constitutional experts say it can't be done. And I've tweeted and written in columns and so on. And the conservative politicians, including Mr. Kenney, still use that argument. To me, that's a lie. That's not false claim. That is a lie. Once you know it's been corrected and you continue using it, what's your take?
Well, again, so I would agree with you that it's not possible, but constitutional law is a complicated realm, and there are a lot of cases that go to court where that I think have no merit, but until a court, if you get a court to say that it's wrong, then and they keep repeating it, then I think I would venture into the lie category. But these claims about complicated constitutional law, where I think the journalist can go without using imputing motive, which is what you do when you say lie, is to say that claims without evidence. And this is something, again, that we see often in the United States, and I think the New York Times has kind of adopted that with Trump a lot of times. So it's very difficult to not report on what these guys are saying. I'll give you an example. In Ontario, during the last provincial election, Doug Ford kept saying that Ontario had the highest electricity prices in North America. it did not. And so, you could say he was lying about it, but most editors aren't going to let that get through. But what you do say is claims that, and then you say, but in fact, the evidence suggests otherwise. Doesn't suggest, says otherwise.
Now, here's a distinction that I think we should talk about, and I'm guilty of this myself, and based on our conversation, may have to rethink what I consider to be lying and what is, evidence with, or claims without evidence, for instance. And that is the distinction between social media and what we publish on either in a newspaper or on a website as proper journalism. Right. So I'm probably, I would say, and I'll confess to this, I'm more likely to make the accusation of a lie on a tweet or a Facebook post than I am in in a column, for instance, or on video like this. And so I consider this to be journalism. I consider a column to be journalism where I'm much careful. I use a tighter filter. Am I being? But I'm still a journalist when I'm on social media. So you, as a professor at Carleton, would probably take issue with my approach.
So I think yes, I think that when you're on social media and you are identified as a journalist, we need to have the same standards on social media as we do for our other journalists. And that's just not me. I mean, the Globe and Mail has made a real point about, its reporters and journalists having the same standards. That being said, we have different standards. I mean, if you feel it's justified to say somebody is lying and are more comfortable doing it on social media than in a formal column, that's a judgment call. And I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer. What I do think is that you need to have the same level of evidence in making that claim that you would if you did it elsewhere. I don't think we should spuriously spread, and I know you don't, but I think that's the test for me is, do you have the evidence to back it up? And, there are legal issues involved, whether it's social media or elsewhere.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And we should be very clear about this. Accusing somebody of lying and without proof and without a pretty good argument to back it up is a pretty quick way to get yourself sued for defamation and libel.
Yeah, it can be. So you better, and so you need to have clearly established the facts and be very careful. And again, on social media, the journalists really need to be careful about that. I want to add one because we've been talking about the conservatives, but this isn't exclusive to the conservatives. There were claims made by the liberals in 2015 that the conservatives were going to have the army on the street over, I forget exactly what the issue was, but I remember clearly that was the claim. This time, Justin Trudeau was campaigning saying that we've gotten 75% of the way to our target for 2030 GHG reductions, and we have not even close. There are policies in place that are expected to get us there, but that's a big difference between saying it's expected to get us there and we are there. So just to make the point that this isn't exclusive to one side of the debate here.
Right, and I guess from my point of view, because I remember those particular issues, I would say that is probably in the category of spin, and yes. It might have been spun pretty hard, but I would not call that a lie. Generally, when I'm prepared to call something a lie, is when the data says otherwise and it's clear as a bell, or it's been the misinformation. The claim without evidence has been made over and over again. It's been corrected over and over again, and the politician or political party continues to use it. So
right, that's fair, Paul. And that's the difference between Ford saying we have the highest electricity rates, which is demonstrably false, and somebody making a prediction about what somebody else is going to do, which cannot be proven to be true or false.
Now, I want to tell you an anecdote a story that I experienced personally to get your feedback on this. And I really appreciate the fact, your long experience, and especially working in an environment like a Globe and Mail newsroom, where there are very strict rules and guidelines, and you're expected to adhere to them,
Yeah.
and which is different than me, where I'm in a newsroom of two and I have to self-police. And I don't have colleagues that I can just call up or call over and say, hey, what do you think about this? Or where's our 50-page guideline on, our booklet on this. So here's the story. During the election campaign, Tim McMillan, who was the CEO of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers,
Right.
was making speeches, and he made one in front of the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce, where he echoed Jason Kenney's comments, and he said that thank you, Zipporah Berman, thank you, Jane Fonda, you're anti-pipeline activists. Thanks to you, there are tens of thousands of Albertans who have lost their jobs because of your activism. That is demonstrably untrue. You can look at the data in for oil field employment, and it directly correlates to price. I mean, why would we be surprised that when oil drops from over $100 a barrel down to $23 a barrel inside of 6 months or 9 months, whatever it was, that a lot of people lose their jobs in the oil field? And to ignore all of that and blame it on the politicians, on activists, is in my mind quite egregious. So I went to CAP and I said, look, this is demonstrably untrue. Here's the data. Here's some explanation. I would like to interview Tim about this so that he can respond to that and we can have a discussion about it. They refused. They wouldn't.
Yes.
So they said no, and I wouldn't let it go. I said, no, if your CEO is going to be making public claims in speeches during an election campaign, he has an obligation to defend that or at least explain it. And it got to after the exchange of a couple of emails, they blackballed me. I am now persona non grata at CAP. They will not respond to requests for emails. And as by way of background, they have never once in the 5 years that they've been giving me on the record interviews, they have never once contacted me to correct a story or to discuss my take on a particular story. This came right out of the blue. And how would you respond to that? Do you think that he was lying and did I go too far? What's your...
I think that you were right in challenging his numbers. I think that the activists who have been quite successful, frankly, in delaying pipeline expansions have had an impact. But that's only one of many factors. There was the price. A lot of the investors just moved. There's concerns about climate change. There's the boom in Texas that drew a lot of investment. So a lot of factors. And no, you cannot put it solely at the doorstep of the pipeline protesters. So I agree that it was wrong to do that, and I think you were right to call them on it. Unfortunately, as journalists, we can't subpoena people and force them to answer our questions. So they get to choose who they will respond to, and I think as a journalist, all you can do is keep holding them to account, and do what I tell my students and what we do at the Globe and Mail. If they won't respond to your questions, you say they won't respond to my requests for comment.
Now, you've been in this business a long time, and we've agreed, I think, that in the age of Trump, things have changed around misinformation and disinformation. Does that, in the age of Trump, does that make our job as journalists even more important? And do we need to be more aggressive or more assertive about chasing that truth, identifying what is true and isn't true? What do you think?
So I think it does, but I think it makes it harder because there is this parallel universe out there that interesting. I heard it first from Cap that you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. I used to hear that all the time. Well, it turns out you are entitled to your own facts, and any lawyer in the world knows that. You pick the facts that support your argument and leave all those inconvenient facts off the table. So it's our job to chase the facts. And yes, I think it's even more important now than it was to really try to stick to the facts. That's why I think old-fashioned report it journalism is really important. Columnists have an important place in our architecture, but I think it's really important for a paper like the Globe and Mail to have a lot of reporters who are just not trucking in their opinion, but really trying to stick as much as possible to the facts as they find them.
I like your opinion on this because I do value your insights. And when we started Energy Media 5 years ago, it very much was the old style, it was reporting and
Yeah.
less column writing. But over the years, and particularly over the last 2 or 3 years, readers have said, Markham, I really appreciate the fact that you interview these experts, because that's kind of my brand. I interview economists and engineers and scientists, what have you. But I want to have more analysis on this. I want explain to me what that means. I can go to any number of news outlets and I can find the bare facts. But what that means has become more important to readers over time, in my experience. And so I've kind of evolved this hybrid column where you've got 2 or 3 or 4 expert interviews, you've got data. You've got an analysis of the facts, so it's kind of reporting, but there's also analysis. And
Right.
So,
I would not distinguish between reporting and analysis. I think it's important. A lot of my writing, as I developed, a stronger presence on the beat and got to really know it over the years. I tried to convey what it mattered, why it mattered, and context around it. I don't think that's opinion, and it's more analytical writing. Now, it's a continuum, right? I mean, there are columnists out there. I think of Campbell Clark for the Globe and Mail. Does a lot of reporting, and his columns are heavily reported, but he'll put a layer of his opinion in there, and sometimes you actually have to think about what he's saying to glean his opinion. And then there are those who are more opinionated. I think along the lines that you're talking about, it's analysis / opinion, but the heavy reporting, people want you to bring facts to the table and not just tell them what you think. I think is what I'm trying to suggest here.
Shawn, I really appreciate this. This is as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, we have a small newsroom. So I don't often get to have these kinds of discussions over a beer with my fellow journalists, and because that's what I'm sure happened in the Globe and Mail newsroom or editorial meetings. And so I really appreciate this, because these are, to me, really profound issues within our profession that need to be wrestled with. I wrestle with them. Clearly, you have wrestled with them, and other journalists are as well. And as the profession continues, as the craft continues to evolve, we need to kind of have that discussion, and we don't often do it in public. And that's why I like the video interview, because my readers can sit down for 20 minutes or whatever it is, and hear, I think, a fairly nuanced discussion of these issues. So thank you. I really appreciate that.
I think it's hugely important, and I think I appreciate you doing this publicly, because it should be. We don't cover our industry very well, and I think it needs to be aired, and people need to think about it and need to think about where they go for information and not just opinion. And so I'm always happy to pick up the conversation if you want to do it again down the road.
I can guarantee, Shawn, that we will do that very thing. So thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it. And we'll look forward to the next interview.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.